You are listening to Daily Unexpected Stories, where forbidden relationships are told with all the truth of emotion. Autumn came earlier than usual in the Vermont mountains. The maples on the hillside turned fiery red and burnt orange falling on the porch in a soft carpet, evoking a sense of warmth mixed with an unnamed nostalgia. Anna pulled her turtleneck up to her chin as she stepped onto the porch. She set her steaming cup of coffee down on the armrest of the chair, the heat from the mug seeping through the thick wool, warming her hands accustomed to the chill of early mountain mornings. Inside the house, May was still sleeping, her 13-year-old daughter always curled up with a blanket like a cat every fall. It had been more than a year since Richard, her husband, had died of a sudden stroke. Life since then had been a series of rhythmic, steady, sometimes too quiet days. Anna worked part-time as a nurse at a local clinic. She chose to withdraw from the cycle of all-night shifts and stress. She chose to be with May, or at least close enough to feel like she still needed her. The phone rang. An unrecorded call, but Anna recognized the voice at first. "Hi, it's Lucas. I was thinking I'd come stay a few weeks. If that's okay." The voice was low, quiet, and somewhat cautious. Anna paused. Lucas, Richard's stepchild. He'd been here a couple of times on Christmas or Thanksgiving. He lived with his mother in Boston, not long out of college, and the last time they'd seen him, Lucas was a thin, quiet young man. "Of course," Anna said a little slowly. "You're always welcome." She tried to keep her voice even, but something in her chest shook. She didn't know if it was from surprise or something deeper. 2 days later, an old gray pickup truck skidded onto the gravel drive in front of the house. Anna saw it from the kitchen window as she washed glasses. There was soap suds on her hands when she stepped out onto the porch. Lucas stepped out of the car with a duffel bag over his shoulder, his brown hair longer than usual, and eyes that Anna had never seen on anyone but Richard, deep, distant, and silent, like the forest behind the house. "Hey," he said, first setting his bag down on the steps. "Welcome back." Anna smiled, but her heart was troubled. Lucas bowed, then looked around the house as if trying to keep himself grounded in his reverie. "This smells the same," he said softly, taking a breath. "Wood, apples, something else I can't name. Cinnamon, maybe?" Anna nodded, stepping aside to make way into the house. They didn't hug. No one knew if one hug was too much or too little. May walked down the stairs, still half asleep. She froze when she saw Lucas. "Hi, kiddo." Lucas bowed, his voice light as the wind. "Hi," May replied, and crouched down on the bottom step, her eyes never leaving her half-brother. Anna watched the scene and felt a small stab in her chest. The awkwardness of 3 people in one house each, carrying within them the shadow of a dead man. The house was the same, but not the same. Lucas carried his bag into the living room, which was still the same place, but the furniture had been rearranged. Anna had cleared out the bookshelves, replaced the bedsheets, and left behind a few of Richard's favorites, Thoreau Steinbeck, and a few old photographs. "Looks good," Lucas said, placing his hand on the frame. She nodded. "I didn't know if you still liked reading." "Still do." He smiled a smile that startled her because it was so similar to Richard's. The afternoon came faster than she remembered. They had dinner of roast beef and potatoes baked in foil in the wood stove. May talked about her schoolwork. Lucas listened, answering in short sentences, occasionally making a small joke that made her laugh. Anna felt her chest soften as the laughter rang out. She looked at Lucas, who was raising his glass of water to his mouth, his cheekbones highlighted by the yellow light. A young man, self-possessed, quiet, and something that was no longer husband's son. After dinner, as she washed the dishes, and Lucas wiped the table, they stood side by side in the kitchen, which had once held 3 people, now reduced to 2 large figures, one small one. How's your real mom?" Anna asked, trying to keep her voice light. Lucas nodded, still holding the towel. "Still strong, still opinionated, you know." "Still not a fan of me?" She laughed softly, unable to hide her bitter amusement. Lucas was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "She doesn't know you. Not really." The words, seemingly light, fell between them like a bright red maple leaf, beautiful, silent, and hard to ignore. That night, Anna stood in her room looking out the window at the pickup truck parked under the maple tree. The living room light was still on. Lucas probably hadn't slept yet. Maybe he was writing something, or simply listening to the rustling of the autumn wind on the roof. The sound that once made Richard smile and now made her feel full of things she had yet to name. Lucas's room was at the end of the second-floor hallway, across from Richard's old study. When he was alive, he'd spent Sunday mornings there, reading the paper and listening to old vinyl records. After he died, Anna had mostly locked the room, leaving everything as a quiet museum of the dead. Lucas's room was different. It had been a spare room cleaned every major holiday when the family had guests. Anna had spent the previous afternoon changing the sheets, rewashing the sheer curtains, wiping down the wooden bookcases, and dusting off the fine dust on the desk Richard had built himself. She hesitated for a moment before the old alarm clock on the bedside table. It was still ticking. Tick-tock. Like the lingering beat of someone's heart. Anna considered putting it away, then decided against it. She left it alone, her hand running across the scratched glass. Maybe he'll like it, she said to herself, and pulled the curtains back, letting the afternoon sunlight flood the room. The next morning, Anna went to the kitchen early, making coffee and preparing some pancakes for May. When Lucas walked in, he was wearing a red and gray flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "Smells like cinnamon and memories." Lucas laughed, standing by the table, his eyes scanning the area as if he were taking in every detail. "Just the usual," Anna smiled, turning back to the stove. "Breakfast is yours if you pour the syrup." They ate breakfast in a strangely comfortable atmosphere. May carefully cut the cake into small squares, glanced at Lucas, then looked down at her plate. "Your shirt looks soft," she said, her voice low. Lucas laughed. "It is. Want to try it?" May shook her head, blushing. Anna watched the scene, laughing softly. It was the first time in months that May had initiated a conversation without being prompted. After breakfast, Lucas did not rest as she had expected. He checked the porch, which had leaked the previous winter, then brought out a ladder to fix the loose handle on the back door. Anna stood inside and watched. Lucas was leaning on the ladder, screwing in the screws, sweat running down his neck, the sunlight reflecting off his tanned cheeks. He was no longer the shy, frail boy she had seen in the pictures. He was a man now, calm, steady, and somehow peaceful. Anna turned back, her heart suddenly stirring in an unfamiliar way. She told herself it was just the thrill of seeing a piece of Richard come to life in Lucas. But something in her knew. It wasn't quite like that. That afternoon, the three of them cleaned out the small shed in the back garden. May was unusually enthusiastic. She carried the toolbox, swept away the cobwebs, and laughed when Lucas told her about how Richard had once painted the walls the wrong color, turning the study the color of boiled cabbage. Anna laughed, remembering how she had been so angry that day that she hadn't said a word for 2 days. "Dad said he did it on purpose." "Just to make you talk," Lucas said, wiping the old wooden board. Typical Richard. Anna shook her head, still holding the rag, her eyes sparkling. Lucas looked at her, his gaze lingering for a few seconds before he turned away. The warehouse seemed brighter after the cleaning. The gloomy feeling that had once pervaded the place was now just a layer of dust. "Let's do dinner out here tomorrow night," Lucas suggested, tapping lightly on the wooden windowsill. May jumped up, like a picnic. "With candles," Anna nodded, smiling. "Sure, why not?" A dinner in the wooden warehouse, never planned. But perhaps the unexpected sometimes meant more than the prepared. In the evening, Anna knocked on Lucas's door to hand him a thick blanket. She opened the door softly and saw Lucas sitting on the floor, his back against the bed, reading a hardcover book. "Extra blanket," she said, holding up her hand. Lucas looked up, smiling slightly. "Thanks." She turned to leave, but then stopped. "Is it okay staying here?" Anna asked, her eyes fixed on the chair by the window where Richard had sat reading. Lucas nodded. "It's peaceful, and a little strange, but not bad." She nodded, feeling satisfied. Before closing the door, Lucas added Anna. She turned her head back. "Thanks for letting me come back," he said, his voice slow and steady, not needing any further explanation. Anna stood for a few more seconds in silence, then smiled slightly and gently closed the door. Behind that door, her heart vibrated like a string accidentally plucked by someone. Not exactly happy, not exactly sad, just something nameless, but alive. Anna's kitchen had been filled with the scent of flour and cinnamon since mid-afternoon. She was mixing the dough in a blue ceramic bowl with a chipped handle, while Lucas stood beside her, measuring the brown sugar from a handwritten recipe in Richard's old notebook. Your dad was the only person I knew who measured cinnamon by instinct, Anna said, stirring gently with a wooden spoon. He'd throw it in like salt. Lucas laughed. That's how his pancakes always tasted like Christmas. His voice was low, tinged with a slight irony, but his eyes were sad. She glanced at him, and for the first time she noticed that Lucas had unintentionally taken on her father's features, not just in his eyes or his smile, but in the way he stood leaning slightly to one side, his left leg propped up against the wooden wall, as if he had belonged to this kitchen for a long time. May was sitting in the corner doing her homework and sniffing at the smell of baking bread in the oven. "Smells like autumn," she said, not looking up from her notebook. "Exactly the goal," Anna laughed, wiping her hands on her apron, then went to check the oven temperature. Lucas tilted his head at her, his chin resting on his hand. "Can I ask you something?" he asked, his voice suddenly slow. Anna turned back. "Sure." "After Dad passed, what was it like for you?" The question fell through the kitchen like a cold wind blowing through a warm afternoon. May looked up at her mother and then back down as if sensing something that shouldn't be interrupted. Anna was silent for a moment, her eyes on the window where the maple leaves were swaying. "Quiet," she said, as softly as the wind across water. Too quiet, like the house kept waiting for someone who never came home. Lucas nodded slightly, his eyes following her every word. "May was quiet too," Anna continued, her voice even. "She wouldn't sleep unless I kept the hallway light on. I started leaving the radio on all night, just so I wouldn't hear the silence." A meaningful silence fell between them. Lucas stood up, walking to the high cabinet to retrieve the china bowl. Anna reached up just in time. Her hand brushed his, lightly, but enough to make them both pause for a second. The warmth from Lucas's hand suddenly spread, causing Anna to step back reflexively, their eyes meeting briefly. Neither of them said anything. It was just a touch, but it said too much for what should have been a casual moment. "Sorry," Lucas said quickly, his voice dropping. Anna shook her head. "It's fine," she replied softly, trying to smile, but it didn't quite work. She turned away, continuing to mix the butter mixture in silence. Lucas stood beside her, equally silent. The sound of the mixer and the smell of cinnamon overpowered everything, even what had flashed in their eyes. The cake was brought out of the oven, about 40 minutes later, lightly cracked, golden brown, fragrant. May excitedly cut the first slice, placing it on Lucas's plate as a small ritual. "Best Big Brother award," she said, handing the plate of cake with both hands. Lucas bowed his head in thanks, patting his sister's head. "I accept." Anna looked at them. Part of her felt warm, the other vaguely worried. Not for Lucas, but for her, because she couldn't deny the strange feeling growing inside her, despite her rational denial. Lucas chewed on a piece of cake, then smiled. "Tastes like the holidays we never had." Anna looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we'll make new ones. Different, but ours." Lucas looked at her for a long time. No one said anything more, but they both knew, from the moment their hands touched the kitchen cabinet between the china and the smell of cinnamon, something had quietly shifted. The porch on an October evening carried a gentle chill and the distinctive smell of rotting wood that was characteristic of the Vermont mountains. Small string lights hung along the eaves, casting a soft yellow glow over the old wooden table and two rocking chairs. It was quiet enough to hear the crickets and the soft rustle of maple leaves on the tin roof. Anna poured some more warm cider into two ceramic mugs. She handed one to Lucas, who was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on the railing, his gaze wandering toward the woods. "Careful, it's hot," she reminded, her hands still shaking slightly from the warmth radiating from the mug. Lucas took it, nodding. "Thank you. It smells like something my dad would have loved. Sweet spiced, slightly too much cinnamon," she chuckled. "Exactly," he winked, taking his first sip. "Well..." They were both silent for a few minutes. The only sound was the wind through the cracks in the wood, the wind in his hair. The moonlit sky, thin wisps of mist drifting along the mountainside. "Did he ever talk about me much?" Lucas asked suddenly, his eyes still fixed on the dark canopy in the distance. Anna turned, slightly surprised by the question. Richard. Lucas nodded, smiling sideways. "Yeah, him." Anna clasped her hands around the cup, placing it on the wooden table. "He mentioned you, often, just never in the way you might want." Lucas curled his lips slightly. Meaning. He didn't know how to talk about regret. She paused for a moment, her eyes looking down at their clasped hands. Lucas fell silent, then leaned his head back. I didn't really blame him, he said so softly that the wind almost drowned it out. I just learned to live around the absence, like a piece of furniture that was never delivered. Anna looked up at him. The words made her heart sink. Your mom did her best, she whispered. Lucas nodded, eyes still distant. She did, and she hated when I asked about him. Anna chuckled. That sounds familiar. Lucas glanced over. You two agreed on something at least. They both laughed, the sound echoing through the windy space. Remember the Thanksgiving he burned the turkey? Anna asked, leaning toward Lucas. Oh God, and pretended it was intentional blackened flavor, Lucas laughed loudly. And the smoke alarm wouldn't stop for 20 minutes, she added, laughing, until tears came to her eyes. I swear he poured maple syrup on it to hide the bitterness. After laughing, they sat in silence, breathing lightly, as if they had just gotten rid of a long year. Anna looked at Lucas. He was wiping the corners of his eyes, his broad shoulders shaking with a rare fit of laughter. Under the yellow light, his face showed the lines of maturity. A real man, no longer the distant boy who had been lost in his memories. Lucas looked up, and for the first time, he looked at her for a long time, not with the eyes of a guest in the house, but with the quiet look of someone who was beginning to feel at home in a place where he had thought he was an outsider. Anna sat sideways in her chair, her chin resting on her hand, her smile still on. The wind blew her hair loose, a few strands brushing across her cheekbones. And something in Lucas's eyes changed. Something softer, then deeper. People always say you were too quiet, he said softly. Anna turned. Too quiet, Lucas nodded. But I think you were just always listening. Anna looked at him surprised. No one had ever said that to her. Maybe, she said slowly. Or maybe I just never thought I had much to say. Lucas sipped his wine, then spoke softly as the wind. Well, I'd listen, if you ever did. The words made her pause, not because of the boldness, but because of the rare sincerity from a young person like Lucas, who at an age often rushed into the world with feet that never knew fatigue. But Lucas sat here in the middle of the autumn night, quiet and deep enough to touch the empty spaces she had hidden inside. Toll, the air began to get colder. Anna stood up, gathering the 2 cups. I'll head in, she said, her eyes avoiding that gaze. You staying out here a bit? Lucas nodded, his hands behind his head. Yeah, just a few minutes. She nodded, slightly, stepped inside, closed the door gently, but in her chest something was still open. When Anna lay on the bed, her head on Richard's old pillow, she closed her eyes, but Lucas's image was still clear. His face, when smiling, his eyes, when quiet. The words he spoke, honest few, but deep. She turned her face inward, the blanket pulled up to her shoulders. But the warmth from the blanket was not enough to soothe the slight but persistent vibration in her heart, an emotion she did not know what to name, or if she was allowed to name. That morning the Vermont sky was covered in a light mist like a white silk curtain. The early morning light filtered through the window, casting long, quiet streaks on the wooden floor of the kitchen. The wind carried the scent of dry leaves and a bit of the early winter chill, signaling the change of season. Anna woke up earlier than usual. May was still asleep. The house was so quiet that she could hear the ticking of the wall clock. She didn't bother to change, just put on Richard's old shirt, a soft cotton fabric with a worn collar with the lingering scent of the mornings he often wore when he went out to the porch to drink coffee. She didn't wear a bra underneath, a habit she had developed when she was home alone. The shirt was thin, the middle button slightly bulging with each movement. She didn't think much of it. For her, the mornings in this house were a safe zone, the most private space. Anna stood by the stove, pressing the coffee maker, her eyes dreamily looking out at the backyard through the misty glass window. When the rustle of footsteps on the stairs sounded behind her, she didn't turn around, thinking it was May. "Morning," a soft male voice said behind her. She turned startled. It was Lucas. They both froze for a moment. Lucas stood in the kitchen doorway, his eyes meeting hers, and immediately stopping, not necessarily on purpose, but out of embarrassment. He looked away almost immediately, his hands on the doorframe for support. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was up yet." He stammered, his voice low. Anna quickly tightened her grip on her shirt, feeling her face burn. "It's okay," she replied, but her voice was so small it was almost as if she was talking to herself. The space felt strangely cramped, as if the kitchen had shrunk to a corner that barely fit two people. Lucas turned slowly, his eyes on the floor, as he walked to the coffee bar. Anna handed him a clean cup, not looking directly at him. Her hand brushed his again, accidentally, and they both pulled back. Neither said anything, only the steady hum of the coffee maker. Lucas filled his cup, then took a step back. "I'll head upstairs," he said quickly, his eyes never leaving the wood. "All right," Anna nodded, still clutching her blouse, as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. Lucas walked quickly out of the kitchen. The sound of his footsteps echoed up the stairs, and then disappeared behind the attic door. Alone, Anna sighed, put down her cup, and leaned against the stove. She looked down at her shirt, the collar a little loose, the sleeves hanging down past her wrists, and realized her carelessness. But what made her heart beat faster wasn't being seen. It was the look Lucas gave her before he turned away. It wasn't a curious look, nor was it an accident, but the eyes of a man recognizing the presence of a woman, fully and without avoidance. Upstairs in the attic, Lucas sat by the small window, the sunlight streaming through the panes onto the table where he often wrote. A cup of coffee sat beside him, steam still rising. He opened the brown leather notebook, flipped to the page he was writing on. His hand paused for a long time before he began writing the first line of the morning. "I see her as more than memory now." He sat still for a long time after that, his eyes looking out at the slowly falling leaves outside. Not because he saw something wrong, but because he saw more clearly what was right. The feeling he had tried to avoid since the first days he entered this house. She was no longer Dad's wife. She was becoming herself, a woman sadder, deeper, and more real than anyone he had ever known. That afternoon, the sun was pale across the backyard. The wind was blowing harder than usual, carrying the rustle of leaves against the roof tiles. Anna stood in front of the garage door, clutching a slightly rusty set of keys. "I should clean this up before the first snow," she said, as if talking to herself. Lucas stood next to her, hands in his pockets, nodding. "I'll help." Their garage was an old-fashioned one, old wooden double doors hinges that creaked when they opened. Inside, it was dark and dusty, stacked with cardboard boxes, each one stained with time garden tools, folding chairs, old skis, a few boxes of children's toys with their lids missing. "Richard never threw anything away," Anna said, sweeping cobwebs from a corner of the ceiling. Lucas bent down to pick up a carton, reading the faded label, Photos, 1980s. "Want me to open this?" he asked. Anna nodded, wiping her hands on her jeans, and sat down next to him. Lucas carefully opened the box. Inside were faded albums, scattered photos, some still dusty, others yellowed at the edges. There were wedding photos of Richard and his ex-wife, Lucas's mother, in the backyard in the summer, both of them still very young. Anna leaned down to look at them with him. "She was beautiful," she said, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Lucas nodded. "Still is, but different now, sharper." They flipped through a few more. Richard, holding Lucas as a baby, camping in an old pickup truck. And then a photo fell out of the stack, a young Richard sitting on the hood of the car with a cigarette in his hand, his eyes looking far away, strangely sad. Anna picked up the photo, her fingers gently stroking the curled edges. "He always carried something heavy," she whispered. Lucas glanced at her. "What was it?" Regret, she said, then looked up at him. "About you. About missing too much." Lucas said nothing, just stared at the photo in her hand for a long moment. Silence filled the garage for a moment. Dust particles drifted in the sunlight through the cracks in the wood like early snow. Anna was about to put the photo back in the box when Lucas reached out to take it. His hand touched hers lightly. This time, no one was startled. Lucas looked at her, his eyes slow and deep, as if reading something behind the calm mask she always wore. "Maybe he carried it, but he also left parts of it behind," he said. Anna was about to reply, but couldn't find the words. The air between them became thick. Then Lucas raised his other hand and placed it lightly on her shoulder. Not a strong touch, but not a quick one either. Anna looked straight at him, eyes unblinking. His hand was warm, real, and made her feel like she was breathing for the first time in a long sleep. She didn't push away. He didn't move. They just stood there between old photos, past objects, and silence filled with unspoken words. "What you looking at?" May's voice rang out from the garage door. Anna turned around, startled. Lucas dropped his hand. May walked in, holding an apple. She had just picked, her hair loosely tangled at the nape of her neck. She glanced at them both, her gaze lingering a little longer than usual. "Found anything cool?" she asked, her eyes darting around. Lucas smiled wryly, bent down to grab an old wool hat from another box. "Maybe this," he said, putting it on. "Think it suits me." May laughed. "You look like a mushroom." Anna laughed too, but her heart still pounded wildly. She wondered not about May's gaze, but about herself. Why didn't she back away? And why she still clearly remembered the feeling of his hand on her shoulder, like the only thing in that garage that was alive. The afternoon was peaceful when suddenly the sky darkened. The wind blew hard, blowing the fallen maple leaves all over the porch. Dark clouds rolled in, covering the mountains in the distance. Anna was preparing dinner when she heard thunder echoing from the woods, each sound like a drumbeat. "Storm's coming," Lucas said, as he walked in from the backyard, his jacket draped over his shoulders, his hair slightly wet. Anna looked up at the sky through the kitchen door, then turned to check the flashlight in the drawer. "Let's hope the power stays this time," she said. But less than 5 minutes later, there was a loud click, and every light in the house went out. "Spoke too soon," Lucas laughed, groping for the flashlight on the shelf. May ran down from the attic, carrying a thin blanket. "It's spooky," she said, her eyes wide. "Then we need stories to match Lucas," said, grabbing a few more candles and a lighter. Soon, the living room became a mini ghost story camp. 3 people sat on the floor, blankets wrapped around them, a large red candle crackling in the middle, and an old flashlight turned upside down so that its light reflected off the ceiling, casting shadows on the wall like in an old movie. Once upon a time, Lucas began his voice low. In a cabin, not so different from this one, lived a ghost who hated thunderstorms. May cried out softly, burying her face in the blanket. Anna laughed, tapping Lucas lightly on the shoulder. "Don't traumatize her." "I'm educating," he joked, and continued telling the half-serious, half-joking story about a ghost who knew how to make waffles, but only appeared when it rained heavily, and the family ran out of brown sugar. The 3 of them laughed out loud for the umpteenth time. May rolled her eyes, occasionally adding details to the story, like a child screenwriter. Anna leaned back on the sofa, her hands holding a cup of cold tea, her eyes following Lucas's every expression. The way he listened attentively to her, the way he didn't interrupt, and especially that smile. The thing that made the room seem brighter, even without the lights on. She felt light-hearted, a rare feeling since Richard left. Not because she heard laughter, but because that laughter came from a place closer to her than sadness. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. May fell asleep on the carpet, her mouth still muttering something about ghost waffles. Lucas picked her up and placed her on the sofa, carefully covering her with a blanket. Anna sat back down at the coffee table, the candlelight flickering on her gentle face, casting long shadows on her cheeks and neck. Lucas turned back, sat down opposite her, both of them silent for a moment, as thin as mist. Outside, the rain was still falling steadily. There was no more thunder, just the soft sound of water drops falling on the corrugated iron roof, steady like a heartbeat. "Storm like this always makes me restless," Anna said softly, looking out the window. Lucas nodded. "Me too. Feels like something's about to change." She turned her eyes, landing on him. "What kind of change?" Lucas shrugged, smiling slightly. "The kind you don't see coming." Anna pulled the blanket over her lap, cringing slightly, as a breeze blew through the crack in the door. Lucas noticed, stood up, and went to the corner of the room to grab another thick blanket, then walked toward her. "Here," he said, gently covering her shoulders with the blanket. His hand touched her hair as he leaned down, just for a moment, but long enough for them both to feel the sudden increase in closeness, not by the action, but by the breathing. Her hand squeezed the edge of the blanket. He pulled it back slowly. Their eyes met for a few silent seconds. And then, as if simultaneously realizing the small transgression, Anna said softly, "Thank you. You should probably rest. It's late." Lucas nodded, stepping back slightly. "Yeah, you too." He stood up, turning toward the stairs. The candlelight cast a long shadow on the wooden wall. Before disappearing around the corner, he turned back briefly, as if he wanted to say something, but then fell silent, walking up the stairs. Anna was still sitting there, the candlelight flickering to its end. Her heart was still beating fast. She looked at her hand, where a few minutes ago he had placed the blanket. A simple gesture. But why did it make her feel so close? She touched her collar, as if to make sure she was still in reality. But that reality was different now. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, the candlelight faded. But the warmth of that moment lingered like a light that didn't need a fire. If only someone had stepped in at the right moment. The clock read nearly 2 in the morning. The house was so quiet that the sound of wood moving in the cold was audible. The wind outside the forest blew through the cracks in the door, casting a faint moonlight on the living room wall. Lucas turned in bed for the 4th time, then sat up. He put on a thin sweater, pulled the sleeves down to his wrists, and quietly left the attic. Down in the kitchen, the small, dim light was still on. And there, on the sofa by the window, sat Anna. On her lap was an open book, her bare feet curled up under a brown felt blanket. She was not surprised to see Lucas. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice low and thin as the night dew. Lucas nodded, stepping closer, hands in his pockets, eyes searching the empty chair beside him. "Mind if I—" Anna patted the pillow beside her. "It's a shared couch." He sat down. They were a short distance apart, close enough to feel warmth, far enough away to avoid touching. Reading something heavy, Lucas glanced at the book. Anna shook her head, smiling slightly. "Just pretending to read. Some nights are like that." Lucas looked at her, then exhaled. "Yeah, I know that feeling too well." There was a pause, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who didn't need much to understand that they were both tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from holding too much in for too long. After Richard died, Anna began, her voice no louder than the wind outside. "I thought I was going crazy." Lucas turned to look, but didn't interrupt. "Really?" she continued. "I looked at everything like it was a lie. The bed, the refrigerator, even the toothbrush. It was all a reminder of his absence. Like everything was pretending he never existed." Lucas swallowed. His throat felt tight, as if something were stuck in it. "I remember the way he walked around the house. I remember the sound of his slippers. I remember the way he grumbled when I left the lid on the jar. And then," she paused, "one day I woke up, and I didn't remember his voice." Lucas turned away, his eyes already wet. "Nobody told me this would happen," Anna said. "That one day the pain wouldn't hurt anymore. It would just leave an empty space." Lucas blinked rapidly. Then, unexpectedly, a sob escaped him, short, tight, full of resentment. Anna turned to him, feeling his shoulders shake slightly. "Lucas," she called softly. He turned to her, tears silently sliding down his cheeks. "Everyone always talked about him like some perfect man," he said, his voice choking. "But you let him be human." She didn't answer. "Just raise your hand very slowly, very softly, and stroke his hair. Like a mother comforting a grown child, like a friend, soothing a friend in pain." Lucas leans his head into her lap, and Anna, for some reason, doesn't pull away. And then she wraps her arms around his shoulders, holding him close. A completely natural hug. Not to soothe, not to fill a void, but to be present together in the same absence. "Shh," she whispers, as his chest shakes softly against hers. "I'm here." At first, it's a healing hug. Neither of them thinks about anything else. Neither of them asks for anything. They just sit there, in the moonlight, in each other's soft, steady breathing. But then, the hug lasts, and gradually the distances become untenable. Lucas raises his head, eyes still moist, and Anna, for some unnamed reason, still doesn't look away. The distance between their faces was now only a breath. She could see the youthful lines on his face, but also the tiredness of maturity, and something so mature that she didn't want to deny it. Lucas said nothing. His hand moved to her back, slowly, almost as if he were afraid of hurting someone. Anna closed her eyes for a moment, not because she was afraid, because her heart was too loud. They didn't kiss, they didn't need to. They just held each other for a long time, as if they let go, there would be no one there to hold them. The hug was no longer just comfort. It had become something else, deeper, more blurred and layered than any definition. But even in that closeness, there was distance. A distance not measured by age, but by the time they had lived without each other. And strangely, it was that distance that made the hug so real. Early morning. Pale, milky sunlight poured through the glass window, illuminating the carpet where 2 cups had been left unfinished since last night. The rain had stopped, but what lingered in the air was not just the damp smell of the earth, but the silence. Lucas sat on the sofa, neatly dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. His eyes stopped at a vague point outside the window. No blinking, no moving. Anna stepped out from the hallway, gently adjusting the sleeves of her pressed cream blouse. Her hair was tied back, her collar pulled up. Everything was strangely neat, as if trying to hide what had just happened in every little detail. She hesitated when she saw him, but then she nodded slightly, as if in a wordless greeting. Lucas responded with a glance. No one said anything. No need, because the silence was so obvious. May ran down from upstairs, clutching a notebook. "Lucas, you fell asleep on the couch." Lucas turned around, his voice short and soft. "Yeah, couldn't sleep upstairs." "Did you and Mom stay up late talking again?" she asked, curious. Anna stopped mid-step. She turned away, pretending to fiddle with the kettle. Lucas glanced toward the stove and answered, still in a low voice. "A bit, yeah." May didn't ask any more questions, her nose buried in her exercise book. She didn't notice anything else in the air. Or there was, but she wasn't old enough to name it. Anna opened the fridge, took out the eggs, butter, and bread. Her hands shook a little as she cracked the eggs into the pan. A little oil splattered on the stovetop. Lucas walked to the counter, standing a little way from her. He put down his cup and pursed his lips, as if he was about to say something, then stopped. She didn't look at him, but she felt his gaze, the feeling that someone was standing very close but couldn't touch. They both remained silent. The kitchen was filled with every little sound, the knife cutting bread, the teaspoon stirring gently in a ceramic mug, the wind blowing through the screen door. "Need help?" Lucas asked softly. Anna shook her head. "No thanks." Her hand slipped as she sprinkled salt a little too much. She exhaled, barely able to hear herself. May walked out onto the porch. The kitchen was left alone. Lucas pulled up a chair and sat down at the table. His hands clasped, his eyes on the wood in front of him. Anna turned her back to him. A minute, 2 minutes. It felt like hours. And then, still without turning, she said softly, "Nothing's the same, is it?" Lucas looked up. Half of her wanted to say no. The other half knew it was a lie. He answered with silence. Anna turned, wiping the pan with a cloth. She didn't meet his eyes, but her gaze lingered on the rolled-up sleeve of his shirt, where she had touched it last night. She felt something fall out of herself. A part that had once been so solid, now no longer had a clear shape. "Do you regret it?" Lucas asked, not sure if he wanted to hear the answer or not. Anna looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since morning. "Does it matter?" Lucas looked at her, nodding slightly. "It does, to me." She paused, then said, "I don't regret feeling something real, but I do regret the world we'll have to return to later." His gaze fell. No rebuttal, no clinging, just acceptance, silent and sad. Because they both knew everything had gone off track. There was no way back. The lines that were once so clear, age, status, history, are now just concepts. No one broke them with their hands, but on that rainy night, they broke on their own. The wind chimes on the porch rang, soft, intermittent, like a signal for something to come. Something they had not yet named, but soon they would have to face it. It was getting dark faster than usual. Thick clouds covered the sky, blocking out the moon. The fireplace in the living room had been lit early. The flames danced, casting shimmering shadows on the time-stained oak ceiling. May had gone to bed early after a long day of school. Her small footsteps echoed up the wooden stairs, then faded into silence. Anna and Lucas were still sitting in the living room on the long sofa. Neither of them had turned on the lights. The only light in the room was from the fireplace, warm, flickering like an old candle, whispering something old. There was a cup of hot cocoa between them, a thin blanket covering their legs that didn't try to avoid each other. The wind outside was whistling. "Funny," Lucas said, first his voice hoarse. "We're sitting by the firelight, but it doesn't feel like any holiday I've known." Anna stared into the fire. "Because we're not celebrating," she said slowly. "We're surviving." A long pause. Then Lucas continued, "I think I've felt this before I admitted it." Anna turned, meeting his eyes, not confused, not avoiding them. "Since when?" she asked, as soft as a breath. Lucas thought for a moment. "Maybe from the second evening, when we laughed about my father burning the turkey." Anna smiled, but her eyes were moist. "You didn't laugh like a child. You laughed like someone who needed to be heard." Lucas nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "And you listened like someone who needed to feel." The fireplace crackled like an ancient heartbeat. "Anna," Lucas said, sitting up straighter, "I don't want to pretend this didn't happen, that it's just confusion or loneliness." She swallowed. Her lips trembled slightly. "I know it's wrong," she whispered, tears falling without wiping them away. "But it doesn't feel wrong when I'm near you." Lucas said nothing. He just reached out, not in a hurry, not forcing, and placed his hand on hers. Anna took his hand as if grasping a resurrected memory. "Richard would hate this," she said. Lucas nodded slightly. "Maybe. But he also left us both with pieces of him we never knew what to do with." She laughed through her tears. "We're stitching grief with something we don't dare name." Lucas bowed his head, whispering, "Then let's not name it." They were silent. Then slowly Lucas leaned in, pressing his lips to her forehead, where the faintest wrinkles had just appeared. Anna looked up, and in an instant the distance between them disappeared, not with desire, but with a gentle realization. The first kiss was not burning. It was a confession with lips, with breath, with trembling of two people who had lost themselves in life. And then they hugged each other, for a long time, without a word. The fireplace slowly burned red, the light spreading like an old color streak in an oil painting. They were not in a hurry. There was no moaning. There was no hurry to undress. There were only very slow touches, eyes never leaving each other. Each hug was a memory soothed. Each breath was a void filled. There was no longer right or wrong. There were only two people, once strangers, now finding each other like two lost people. When Anna rested her forehead on his shoulder, his hands supporting her back, as if holding something fragile, they did not need to say anything more. Everything was clear. The fire continued to burn. Outside, the wind still blew through the rows of bare trees. In that small wooden house, the night passed without marking hours, but with a very soft silence. A night that will not return, but will never be forgotten. The pale dawn covered the Vermont woods like a thin blanket. Raindrops fell silently on the wooden roof, leaving a faint streak on the frosted glass. Everything was quiet, as if the world outside had not yet awakened. In the living room, the fire in the fireplace was reduced to ashes. The thin blanket was still on the sofa. Lucas stepped out from the hallway, his gray sweater pulled on hastily, his hair a little tousled. But there was no faltering in his steps. He went straight to the stove, took the coffee beans from the ceramic pot, and began to brew. His movements were slow, sure, as if this morning were like any other. Anna sat by the window. The early morning light reflected off her lightly tousled hair, her thin shoulders trembling slightly as she pulled on her brown wool cardigan. In front of her was a glass of water that had not yet touched her lips. She did not look at Lucas, but his presence, the gentle stirring of the spoon, the smell of freshly ground coffee, was still something that enveloped her, like a nameless layer of air. No one spoke of last night. No one asked why. No one tried to name the feelings that were quietly growing like sprouts after rain. Lucas poured 2 cups of coffee, placing one in front of her. "It wasn't raining much last night," he said, as if he were just commenting on the weather. Anna nodded slightly, still looking out into the back garden, where a few iron chairs were soaked. "Enough to wash something away," she replied. Lucas didn't ask what, and she didn't explain. There were some things once experienced that could only be left to silence to speak for them. He sat down next to her, not too close, but not too far either. They both sipped their coffee, listening to the patter of rain on the wooden porch. A normal morning, but not a normal morning anymore. The doorbell rang, a clear, sharp sound in the soft air of the house. Anna raised her head. Lucas looked at her. There was something like fear in their eyes for the first time this morning. May was still asleep. Neither of them got up immediately. They both looked at each other, as if waiting for the other to confirm that they had heard correctly. Then the bell rang again, a second time longer. Lucas put down his cup and stood up. "I'll go check," he said, his voice low. Anna nodded, but her heart began to beat faster. Very fast, not from worry, but from a vague feeling at the back of her neck, like a cold wind blowing through an open door. Lucas opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The wooden gate in the distance was only slightly ajar, the hinges creaked from the night rain. A woman stood there, carrying a small suitcase, her long, dark brown hair a little tousled by the wind. Sheepskin coat, brown leather boots, familiar eyes, unmistakable. Lucas stopped dead. "Mom." The woman smiled, not too brightly. "I figured I'd stop by," she said, her Northern American accent precise and clear. "I tried calling, but you don't answer." Lucas glanced toward the door. "Come in, it's cold." Anna stood inside, still clutching her cold coffee. As Lucas's and the woman's footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, she turned, very slowly, and saw the woman enter. Her eyes met Anna's, a brief blink, then a pause. Only for a split second. But that split second was enough for a mother to understand that something was wrong in the air. Lucas said softly, "Mom, this is Anna." She nodded. "Of course. We've met before." Her eyes lingered for another second, where Anna's and Lucas's eyes had briefly met. No overstatement, no words were spoken. But there were looks that could not be faked, and at that moment Anna understood the peace was over. Lunch that day was cream of pumpkin soup. Anna cooked in silence. Lucas washed the vegetables, not saying much. His mother, Meredith, sat at the large wooden table, her eyes never leaving the kitchen during the preparation. No one laughed. No small talk. May chattered away about school, not noticing anything unusual in the room. But every clatter of the spoon against the bowl, every push of the chair, seemed louder than usual. Meredith didn't ask anything. She didn't need to. Experienced people have a special kind of silence, as if they hear better when they don't speak. After the meal, May went up to the drawing room. Lucas stood clearing the dishes. Anna cleared the water glasses, avoiding anyone's eyes. And then Meredith spoke, her first words in nearly 2 hours. "Lucas." He turned around. "You're coming back with me." Lucas blinked. "Wait, what?" Her voice was calm but not wavering. "I'm not asking. We're leaving before sundown. No discussion." Silence. The house held its breath. Anna stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, dishcloth still in hand. Lucas put down his plate, eyes fixed on his mother. "Why, what's going on?" Meredith didn't look at him. She looked at Anna, straight, unmoving, unblinking. "Don't do that," Anna said softly, her voice hoarse, barely aware that she had spoken. Meredith turned to Lucas. "I came here to check on you, because I had a feeling. Call it a mother's instinct. And the moment I saw her eyes on you..." She stopped looking straight. "I knew." Lucas was pushed back a step. "There's nothing. Don't insult me." Her voice was colder than the wind in the forest. Anna stood still. Her heart was pounding. Very hard, but her legs didn't move. Meredith continued, speaking slowly this time. "I know that look. I've had that look, and I know when it's returned." Lucas clenched his fists. His jaw hardened. But he couldn't lie to his mother, not when she was seeing through everything he hadn't even named yet. "Mom!" Meredith cut him off like a full stop. "This is not what your father would have wanted." A sentence. Simple, but enough to hit the room like a hammer blow. Lucas turned to Anna for the first time all day. Their eyes met. But this time, there was no tenderness. There was only helplessness. Anna didn't cry, but her eyes were cracking. Meredith picked up her coat pocket, not waiting for a response. "Pack what you need? We leave in 30. She left the living room, headed for the hallway, her steps as firm as a sentence. Lucas stood there, his hand still on the back of the chair. Anna took a step back. Just one. But it was as if she had been pulled away from a world. "Anna!" he called softly, his voice choked. She didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't shake, just looked at him, with eyes that had been soft as fire, now frozen. Lucas stepped closer, intending to take her hand. But Anna pulled back gently, not in a hurry, not coldly, just letting go. Letting go of what they hadn't had a chance to name. Letting go of the long nights, the touches, the eyes that burned silently, and letting go of what had never had a chance to bloom. She turned around, heading back toward the kitchen. Her hands shook as she put away the bowl. Lucas stood in the middle of the room, not sure whether to follow or stay. Out in the yard, the wind began to blow hard. The return carriage was waiting, though no one had packed. Because in fact, what needs to be taken away is already in their hearts. Meredith's SUV was parked in front of the house, the engine running. Steam rose from the exhaust, mixing with the cold, late afternoon air. The sky was a dull gray, like a thick wool blanket over the Vermont woods. The first cold winds of the season carried the scent of snow, even though it was only late October. Lucas stepped out of the house, a small backpack slung over his back, his face solemn. Every movement was slow, as if he were dragging out each step to delay the inevitable. Anna stood on the porch, her hands clasped together. Her long coat reached down to her knees, the collar pulled up close to her chin. Her eyes were red, but not wet. May was holding a small object wrapped in old newspaper, standing next to her mother. Lucas stopped on the steps, only a few steps away from Anna. But the distance today seemed longer than any morning they had shared. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She looked at him, nodding slightly, as if to say, "I understand," and as if she were saying, "Don't say anything." Lucas leaned forward, lightly touching her forehead. A final gesture, not a kiss, not a goodbye, just holding on to something that had once belonged to each other. She closed her eyes, inhaled, then let go. A small step back, another nod, this time in farewell. May stepped forward, holding out the small package. "I made it for you, last week." Lucas took it, gently unwrapped the paper, revealing a small wooden fox, carved from the trunk of a maple tree in the backyard, painted with uneven watercolors. "Because you said foxes were your favorite?" May said, her mouth pursed, as if trying not to cry. Lucas bent down, hugging her. "Thank you. I'll keep it close." She nodded, her eyes red. Meredith opened the car door, saying nothing, just looked at her watch, but didn't rush. Maybe she understood these farewells couldn't be rushed. Lucas turned to look at Anna one last time. They didn't make any promises. They didn't say, "I'll be in touch." They didn't say goodbye. Because words like that in these circumstances only made things hurt more. He walked toward the car. The door closed. The engine revved. The SUV turned away from the wooden gate, driving down the rain-soaked gravel road, the tires leaving a faint trail of water on the fallen leaves. Anna stood still, her eyes never leaving the car until it disappeared behind the trees. Then she sat down on the steps. No tears, no trembling, just sitting there, like someone who had just put down a piece of her heart that she knew would never be picked up again. The cold wind blew. On her shoulders, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, light, sparse, but real. For the first time in years, Vermont has had snow this early. Anna's story ends here. If you have come this far, perhaps your heart is as quiet as Anna's on a spring morning. Thank you for accompanying this story. If you love forbidden relationships, adultery stories, then subscribe to the Daily Unexpected Stories channel. Every day we bring unexpected stories, not noisy, not ostentatious, but enough to touch a place in your heart. See you in the next story.